Hi, good evening, and very good evening. Okay, this is a quick video about the frames per second um, of Z9 um, uh, in compared to the other competitor, which is Sony A1 and Canon R3. So just because yesterday I I made a video and I thought, okay, uh, it's gonna be uh, 20 frames per second with I didn't mention about the 30 frames per second option for the JPEG. So I thought, okay, let me clear that, because everybody is saying that uh, the Z9 is only 20 frames per second, not 30 frames per second, unlike the R3 and the A1. So I thought, okay, let me explain why and how uh, the Z9 works. Because yes, since yesterday till today, I'm doing tons of research, tons of study how the Z9 works and why it's 20 frames per second cap, why we cannot have more than that. First of all, the A9 does 50 frames per second, and that I'm saying 50 megapixel. My apologies, 50 megapixel at 30 frames per second, which is compressed raw, compressed. It's not uncompressed. At 220 frames per second, uncompressed. So just like Z9. So if you are going for compressed raw, you can only do 30 frames per second. But if you are having uncompressed, so the A9 will do 20 frames per second, which is exactly like Z9. So don't get hype that Sony can do 30 frames per second because it's compressed, not uncompressed. If Nikon can do firmware upgrade, we can do 30 frames per second uncompressed or high efficiency raw. It can be done in Nikon with a firmware upgrade, pretty much sure. Now let's talk about R3. R3 has 30 frames per second. I believe it's going to be uncompressed raw, but keep that in mind. It's 24 megapixel only, so it has less information to process. So that's why it can do 10 extra frames. It's processing versus information, the power to process versus the total information. So if you have less information, you can quickly process it. If you have too much information, which is like 45 or 50 megapixel, you have much more, you need time to process it, which can lower down your shutter speed, your frames per second. Not shutter speed, your frames per second. So it's just the computational power inside these small machines versus the megapixel that you are trying to cook, that you're trying to capture. If you have less megapixel, you can take more frames per second. If you have more megapixel, you will take less frames per second. It is as simple as that. They are not supercomputers. They are small camera machines with exceptional computational power in it. So that's the first thing I want to tell you. So 20 frames per second raw, high efficiency raw, 30 frames per second JPEG. So you can still have 30 frames per second, all 45 megapixel, full flash, high quality JPEG from Z9. Okay, and the third thing which everybody is loving of Z9, it's 120 frames per second of JPEGs, 11 megapixel JPEGs. And I just watched Matt Granger review and all the review from Frono's Photo. Like these guys, all of them are liking and loving that 120 frames per second because it gives them extra feature. That feature is not present in Sony A1 or Canon R3. It is not there. Yeah, maybe in the next iteration of A1 Mark II, you can have 120 or maybe 240 frames, 240 frames per second. Maybe you can. Sony can do that, but right now, it's not present in their A1 model. Neither it has in R3. Now, one more thing I like to talk is that the when you're talking about the shutter speed, they all of them goes up to 132,000 of the shutter speed. A1 can go 1 over 32,000 of the shutter speed. Z9 can go 132,000 of the shutter speed. R3 can go one stop extra, can go up to 1 over 64,000. So R3 wins over here. But that's the maximum shutter speed. What about the slow shutter speed? R3 can go up to 30 seconds. A1 can go over 30 seconds. That's the maximum you can go. Only Z9 can go up to 900 seconds, which is 15 minutes of exposure. So you are, if you're taking long exposure shots, you by putting a graduated filters, density is like 10 stop filters, long exposure, like 16 stop exposure, you can go easily without even touching the camera. Using a simple snap bridge app from the camera, from the phone, you can do that with Z9. That's not in A1, that's not in R3. So Z9 is a quantum leap in the world of mirrorless camera. And I'm not kidding, that's a fact. Go and check it because I already did my homework. That's why I'm saying this live on the video. And the next thing, I was going through the specs of the Z9. Everybody is like mind blowing, mind blowing specs. All of them are inspired from the mind blowing performance of the autofocus system from the Z9. Everybody, and even I'm scratching my head. Why Nikon didn't do that 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, or at least 2 years ago? They should have done that. Why they are trying to make the last minute entry? Why? They could have done it 2 years ago. So, many of the professional, Fro was right, he's right. And if they would have done it, then wouldn't be much damage to the Nikon brand. But I'm so glad that Nikon able to make this camera. I am so happy to see a machine which can do a part of D850, a part of D6, a part of A1, a part of R3, a part of every camera out there which you can imagine. Every camera out there, a part of everything in one package. That it can do D6, D850, Z6 Mark II, Z7 Mark II, all of them in one package. You just buy Z9 and you can have the best landscape camera, best sports camera, best wedding camera, best portrait camera, best, not about the street photography, because street photography you need to be invisible, you need compact camera. So yeah, but still you can do that, but you have to be invisible to capture images on the street. But still photography or any type of industrial photography, product photography, you just need that one camera, Z9. That's it. Especially the landscape, sports, action, wildlife, photojournalism, portrait, wedding. I mean, it fits everywhere. It does it all. The first camera that I was inspired was D700, and after that, the second camera, which I was very much happy to. When the camera is announced, you go through the specs, you saw the reviews, and you feel really happy to go for it. After D700, I was really happy when the D850 was announced. I was really, really very happy. And after D850, I can say that it's the Z9. Z9, I'm feeling more happy, more, energized, more than when I felt about D850. So because of the performance, because the way Z9 is made with the features that Nikon put into the Z camera, it's all about that. So I was talking about this video is about the frames per second, the buffer size and all that. So I just went through all the specs and then compared with A1 and with R3 and Z9. So yeah, there is a caveat of 20 frames per second raw, uncompressed raw, but when it comes to JPEG, it's 30 frames per second, and that 120 frames per second thing, it's something really crazy. It's something really crazy. No camera in the market can do that. No camera. So if you want to capture, when the ball is going to hit the bat, or that precise moment when the bird is trying to catch the fish into the water, that exact moment, or the dancer is, jumping into the air, her hair is flying away, her dress is flying away, so you can want to capture the maximum peak. That's where that 120 frames is really going to be handy, really. And I can assure you, once you start using that feature, there is no turning back. If you are a sports action wildlife shooter, there is no turning back. You are taking the panorama, the panning shot, not panorama, the panning shot. So you can capture, okay, that this frame is really good. So this feature is really amazing. Of 120 frames JPEG of 11 megapixel. Like it's just like nearly 100 pixel less between height and the width of what D3S used to produce. So it's nearly 12 megapixel. It's mind blowing. It's really mind blowing. So the specs are, the people are still testing this camera, and more specs and more performance is going to be revealed soon over the internet. So stay tuned for more surprises. So I thought, okay, let me clear about this buffer issue. And there's that 20 frames per second only. The Sony can do 30 frames, R3 can do 30 frames, but there is a caveat. So I thought, let me clear you that. R3 has less megapixels, so it can do 30 frames. Okay? Because it has less information, 24 megapixel only. A1 can do 50 megapixel at 30 frames because with the compressed RAW. It's not uncompressed RAW. Okay, so the information is already compressed, then it can easily process 30 frames per second. Whereas the Z9 can do 45 megapixel, 20 frames uncompressed. So there is always a trade-off. It's between the performance and the power. So Z9 is the perfect middle point of it. That's all. I'm going to wrap up this video now. See you guys in some other time with some new features and new amazing shocking features of Z9. Till then, take care. Bye.